My name is Natalie Brooks. I'm 35 years old, and I manage commercial restoration projects for a construction company in Columbus, Ohio. My grandmother Evelyn spent 3 afternoons polishing her crystal wine glass because she insisted it belonged on the place setting she always saved for me during family celebrations. At exactly 7:42 p.m., my mother chuckled as my younger sister smiled and called me 35 and still single. I put my drink down without spilling a drop. Months later, that same crystal glass would be sitting alone on an empty oak table, catching the afternoon sunlight like it was waiting for someone. Here's what neither of them understood about that evening, or about the years leading toward it. The joke wasn't what changed my life. It simply revealed the ranking system my family had quietly been following all along. In my family, every milestone was measured against one invisible scoreboard. Marriage came first. Children came second. Everything else barely counted. My younger sister, Lauren, married at 27, had 2 children before 32, and received endless praise for doing life the right way. I earned a master's degree, supervised multi-million-dollar restoration projects, and bought my own 3-bedroom home at 33, yet those accomplishments were usually followed by someone asking when I planned to settle down. Grandma Evelyn never played that game. Every Thanksgiving and birthday, she quietly placed the crystal wine glass beside my plate before anyone else arrived. She once told me that the glass reminded her strength deserved its own place setting. I smiled whenever she said it, but I also laughed along with the family whenever another joke landed on me. Looking back, I wasn't only being mistreated. I was helping normalize it by pretending it didn't hurt. That year's family dinner was planned weeks in advance. I confirmed my attendance in the family group chat on September 8th, replied again on September 15th, and even texted my mother privately 2 days before the dinner asking whether she needed me to bring dessert. She answered, "Just yourself." My Aunt Carol saw those messages while helping Mom organize the kitchen, so there was never any confusion about my plans. Lauren glanced up from arranging flowers and smirked before saying, "Don't make everything about yourself." Everyone chuckled softly, and someone changed the subject. I remember thinking it was just another harmless comment. I had no idea she was rehearsing the line she'd soon use in front of the entire family. Dinner was served at exactly 7:18 p.m. My mother carried the roast to the center of the oak table while Grandma Evelyn adjusted the crystal wine glass beside my plate one final time with the edge of a linen napkin. Conversation drifted from Lauren's youngest son's soccer tournament to my latest renovation project downtown. For a few minutes, everything felt ordinary. Then, at exactly 7:42 p.m., my father asked whether anyone wanted another toast before dessert. Lauren lifted her glass, smiled toward me, and laughed. "Here's to Natalie," she said. 35 and still single. My mother let out a short chuckle before anyone else reacted. I looked at the crystal glass in my hand, carefully placed it back onto the table, and finally spoke. "I'm not embarrassed by living the life I chose. I'm embarrassed that this family still thinks humiliating someone counts as entertainment." The room fell silent in a way I had never heard before. Even the air conditioner seemed louder. Nobody reached for dessert. Nobody defended me either. My mother only shrugged and said Lauren hadn't meant anything serious. Lauren leaned back in her chair with the same relaxed smile she'd worn all evening. "Don't make everything about yourself," she said, as though she had simply reminded me to pass the bread. Behind her untouched birthday cake, Grandma Evelyn lowered her eyes to the tablecloth instead of meeting anyone's face. The dinner she had spent nearly 10 hours helping prepare suddenly looked like a display no one deserved to enjoy. Grandma didn't cry. Somehow that hurt even more. She quietly folded her cloth napkin into a perfect square, rested her hands on top of it, and whispered that everyone should eat before the food became cold. Her voice carried no anger, only exhaustion. It sounded like someone who had spent decades believing peace always required one person to accept being diminished. Watching her surrender that moment forced memories into focus. Every promotion I celebrated became a conversation about weddings. Every birthday ended with jokes about finding a husband. Every holiday photo placed Lauren's family in the center while I stood at the edge. I had always blamed myself for being too sensitive, but sitting there beside Grandma's crystal glass, I finally admitted something harder. They hadn't taught themselves to treat me that way. I had helped teach them by smiling every time I should have spoken. The next morning, I called my father first, because I honestly believed he had simply frozen under pressure. He sighed before I finished explaining and said, "Your sister likes to tease. Don't make this into a family problem." An hour later, I met Aunt Carol for coffee on High Street. She stirred her drink without looking at me and said, "Your mother has enough stress already. Just let it go." Hearing the same excuse twice felt strangely clarifying. Their priority wasn't fairness. It was comfort. That afternoon, while I was loading boxes into my garage, my neighbor and longtime family friend, Mr. Howard Ellis, stopped by after hearing what happened from Grandma. He listened without interrupting, then said something I have never forgotten. "Natalie, you don't have to keep earning a seat at a table that keeps shrinking yours." It was the first time anyone had given me permission to stop begging for ordinary respect. Even then, I wasn't looking for revenge. I called Lauren that evening and offered the simplest compromise I could imagine. I told her that one sincere apology, even a private one, would be enough for me to move forward. There would be no speeches, no family meeting, no public embarrassment. She laughed before I finished. "You're proving my point," she said. "Don't make everything about yourself." Then her voice became colder. She warned me that if I kept pushing, Mom would stop inviting me to holidays, Dad would blame me for dividing the family, and everyone would remember me as the difficult daughter instead of her. It wasn't an apology. It was an ultimatum built from reputation, relationships, and guilt. When the call ended at exactly 8:56 p.m., I looked at the crystal wine glass sitting on my kitchen counter where Grandma had quietly slipped it into my bag before I left the night before. For the first time, I understood she hadn't given it to me because it was fragile. She had given it to me because she knew I finally wasn't. The next Saturday morning, at exactly 9:15 a.m., I unlocked the front door of my house and realized something I should have understood years earlier. I had spent most of my adult life trying to earn a better position inside a system that depended on me staying beneath someone else. There was no promotion available there. No perfect accomplishment would suddenly make my family see me differently. So I stopped trying to renovate a house that was built on uneven foundations. Instead, I decided to build my own table. I reserved 8 chairs around my dining room, but I set out 10 place settings anyway. 2 remained empty, 1 for my mother and 1 for Lauren. Hope, I decided, didn't have to disappear just because expectations had. By Monday afternoon, I knew I needed to tell everyone about Thanksgiving. I opened my laptop at 4:38 p.m. and wrote the first message. Asterisk, since being mocked in front of everyone seems acceptable in this family, don't bother coming to my house unless you learn basic respect. Asterisk. I stared at it for almost 3 minutes before deleting every word. The second draft sounded even harsher. Asterisk, congratulations. You finally succeeded in making me realize I don't need any of you. Asterisk. That one lasted less than a minute before I highlighted it and pressed delete again. Neither message sounded like the person I wanted to become. At exactly 4:51 p.m., I typed the only version I could imagine reading 5 years later without regret. Asterisk, I'll be hosting Thanksgiving dinner at my home this year on November 26th at 2 p.m. Everyone is welcome. There won't be any speeches about what happened. I simply want a peaceful meal where everyone is treated with respect. If you'd like to come, I'd be happy to have you. Asterisk. I read it twice before pressing send. There were no accusations. No reminders. No emotional traps. Just an open door. 23 minutes later, Lauren replied with 2 words. Asterisk, suit yourself. Asterisk. That was all. No apology. No questions. No curiosity. Just 2 words that told me exactly how much my invitation mattered to her. Thanksgiving arrived with cold sunshine and a temperature of 41 degrees. By 1:40 p.m., my kitchen smelled like rosemary, roasted turkey, fresh bread, and cinnamon apples. My coworkers David and Michelle arrived carrying homemade pie. Mr. Howard brought sweet potatoes wrapped in foil. My next-door neighbors came with their teenage daughter, who insisted on helping set the table. The house wasn't elegant. Someone forgot the cranberry sauce in the refrigerator until halfway through dinner, and one chair made a squeaking noise every time someone leaned back. Nobody cared. At exactly 2:07 p.m., Grandma Evelyn walked through the front door carrying the crystal wine glass wrapped carefully inside the same white linen napkin she had used for years. "I think this belongs here now," she said softly. She placed it beside my plate without another word. Later, when everyone had finished eating, David stood to thank me for opening my home. Before I could answer, Grandma slowly lifted the crystal glass. "I'm 82 years old," she said. "I've attended more family dinners than I can count. Tonight is the first meal I've ever shared where nobody had to become smaller so someone else could feel bigger." No one interrupted her. No one laughed. Every person around that table quietly raised their own glass. Meanwhile, I learned later from my cousin Melissa that dinner at my parents' house had looked beautiful but strangely empty. The polished silver reflected untouched chairs. Conversation never seemed to last more than a minute before fading away. Lauren apparently spent most of the afternoon checking her phone, expecting someone to cancel plans and arrive late. No one did. Melissa told me my mother kept glancing toward the front window every 15 minutes, though she never admitted she was waiting for anyone. When I washed dishes that evening, the silence inside my own kitchen felt different from the silence I'd grown up with. This one wasn't heavy. It was peaceful. That peace still carried a price. Driving Grandma home around 8:45 p.m., I caught myself looking toward my parents' neighborhood before turning the other direction. I missed the version of my family I had always hoped existed. Letting go of that dream hurt more than missing a single holiday dinner ever could. Winning isn't always loud. Sometimes it simply means accepting a loss that was already true. As we stopped outside her apartment building, Grandma rested one hand on mine before getting out of the car. "Your mother grew up believing appearances kept people safe," she said quietly. "Her parents measured love by what the neighbors thought. She never really learned another language." I nodded. Understanding where someone's fear comes from doesn't require you to keep living inside it. That sentence stayed with me all the way home, resting in my mind beside the image of the crystal wine glass catching the light on my dining table, exactly where it finally belonged. Nearly 4 months passed before I saw my mother and Lauren again. It was a rainy Tuesday in March. At exactly 6:14 p.m., my doorbell rang while I was finishing blueprints for a restoration project. Through the window, I recognized both of them standing on my porch without calling first. I saw them immediately, but I didn't rush to answer. I saved my work, shut down my laptop, watered the basil plant on the kitchen windowsill, and only then opened the door 3 minutes later. For the first time in my life, I controlled the pace instead of reacting to theirs. Lauren tried the familiar smile that usually softened difficult conversations. "So, are we done being dramatic?" she asked. It landed with the same emptiness as an old joke no one remembered laughing at. I simply invited them inside and offered coffee. My mother declined the coffee and reached straight for guilt. "Your father hasn't enjoyed a holiday since Thanksgiving," she said quietly. "The family isn't the same." Months earlier, I would have apologized for that sentence before realizing I hadn't caused the problem. This time I only nodded. "I know," I answered. The silence forced them to continue instead of me. Lauren shifted to another strategy. "We all said things that night," she insisted. "Can't we just move on?" I looked toward the crystal wine glass sitting inside the dining room cabinet. "No," I said calmly. "Not until we move through it." For several seconds, nobody spoke. Then my mother asked something I never expected to hear. "When did you stop needing us so much?" It wasn't defensive. It wasn't sarcastic. It sounded like someone discovering the answer might hurt. I thought carefully before replying. "I never stopped needing a family," I said. "I stopped believing I had to accept disrespect to keep one." Neither of them argued. Instead, I gave them the only condition I had spent months considering. "If you truly want things to change," I said, "don't begin with me. Begin with Grandma Evelyn. She spent years protecting everyone else's comfort while losing her own. She deserves the apology before I do." Neither objected. The following Saturday afternoon, they visited Grandma's apartment together. I wasn't there. I never asked what exact words were spoken. Grandma later told me they stayed almost 2 hours, cried more than once, and left very differently than they had arrived. Some conversations become meaningful precisely because they belong only to the people who live them. A year later, family dinners looked nothing like they once had. The old invisible scoreboard had quietly disappeared. We no longer assign the same seats every holiday. Whoever arrived first chose wherever they wanted to sit. The crystal wine glass still appeared at every celebration, but no one treated it like a prize anymore. Sometimes I used it. Sometimes Grandma did. Once my father accidentally poured sparkling cider into it for himself before realizing what he'd done, and everyone laughed together instead of at someone. Lauren changed in smaller ways than I expected. She asked questions instead of making comparisons. When someone interrupted me, she waited until they finished speaking and said, "Natalie wasn't done." The first time she did it, she didn't look at me afterward, almost as if she believed the gesture mattered more without recognition. One Thanksgiving afternoon, she quietly carried the crystal wine glass from the cabinet and placed it beside my plate before anyone else noticed. She didn't announce it. She didn't apologize again. She simply smiled and walked back into the kitchen to help Grandma finish the pie. That small movement told me more than another speech ever could. Grandma Evelyn finally booked the trip she'd postponed for nearly 15 years, a 10-day rail journey through Vermont during peak autumn colors. She mailed me a postcard on the third day with a single sentence written beneath a picture of bright orange maple trees. Asterisk, it's never too late to choose your own season. Asterisk. I still keep that postcard inside the same cabinet as the crystal wine glass. People sometimes remember the sentence I spoke after putting my drink down. I remember something different. I remember finally understanding that silence and peace are not the same thing. The crystal glass still catches the afternoon sunlight whenever family gathers, but now it reflects faces instead of rankings. After 35 years, one dinner at 7:42 p.m., and one table rebuilt with 10 place settings, I learned the truth my grandmother had been protecting all along. The strongest answer to being underestimated isn't proving your worth to people who keep score, it's building a table where no one has to earn their place.